The momentum of the investigation reached a fever pitch as law enforcement agencies across multiple states joined forces to dismantle the trafficking ring. Armed with evidence from James Carter's phone, financial records, and testimonies from survivors like Maya, authorities launched coordinated raids on dozens of locations tied to the network. Each raid uncovered more pieces of the puzzle and more victims desperate for freedom. One particularly harrowing raid took place at an upscale suburban home owned by Victor Langston, the philanthropist whose arrest had stunned the public. On the surface, the house appeared normal: neatly trimmed hedges, expensive cars parked in the driveway, and framed photos of Langston shaking hands with politicians and celebrities lining the walls. But behind locked doors in the basement, officers discovered a chilling scene. Makeshift cells made of chain-link fencing, surveillance cameras monitoring every corner, and stacks of documents detailing schedules, routes, and payments. In one room, they found 3 children huddled together, their faces pale and hollow-eyed with fear. They were malnourished and visibly traumatized but alive. When asked their names, 2 of them refused to speak, too terrified to trust anyone. The third, a girl about Maya's age, whispered, "We thought no one would find us." Her words echoed the same despair that Maya had felt during her captivity, a stark reminder of how deeply these crimes cut into the lives of innocent children. As arrests piled up, investigators began connecting the dots between the high-profile individuals implicated in the case. Some tried to deny involvement, claiming they were unaware of the true nature of the business they supported financially. Others attempted to flee, booking last-minute flights or destroying evidence in a panic. But it was too late. The net had closed around them. Federal agents confiscated laptops, phones, and ledgers filled with incriminating details, exposing the full scope of the operation. Public outrage grew as news outlets reported on the arrests, revealing the dark secrets hidden behind the polished facades of those involved. Parents who had once attended charity galas hosted by Langston now condemned him, demanding answers about how someone so trusted could betray society in such a monstrous way. Lawmakers called emergency sessions to draft stricter legislation targeting human trafficking, while advocacy groups pushed for increased funding for victim support programs. Hashtags like "No More Silence" and "Break the Chain" trended online, amplifying calls for systemic change. For Maya, watching the story unfold brought mixed emotions. On one hand, she felt relief knowing that the people responsible for her nightmare were being held accountable. On the other hand, the constant media attention left her feeling exposed. Reporters camped outside her family's home, eager for an interview or photo. Officers assigned to protect her assured her that her identity would remain confidential, but the pressure weighed heavily on her young shoulders. To help her cope, her counselor encouraged her to focus on rebuilding her life. She started attending art therapy sessions, where she painted vibrant images of stars and sunsets, symbols of hope and resilience. One day, she created a mural at a local community center, inviting other survivors to contribute their own artwork. Together, they transformed a blank wall into a colorful tapestry of courage and healing. For Maya, it was a way to reclaim her voice and remind herself that she wasn't alone. Officer Marcus Hayes stayed in close contact with Maya throughout the process, checking in regularly to see how she was adjusting. He admired her strength and determination, qualities he knew would carry her through the difficult days ahead. Inspired by her bravery, Marcus spearheaded a new initiative within his department, aimed at training officers to recognize signs of distress during routine encounters like the SOS signal that had saved Maya's life. "If we can teach others to pay attention," he told his colleagues, "we can save more lives." By the time the dust began to settle, over 30 children had been rescued, and nearly 24 individuals linked to the trafficking ring were in custody. The operation marked a turning point, not just for law enforcement but for communities nationwide. It served as a wake-up call, highlighting the need for vigilance, awareness, and action to combat human trafficking. But for Maya, the journey wasn't just about survival, it was about finding light after darkness. As she stood beside her completed mural, surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, she realized something important. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor, and her story had become a beacon of hope for countless others still, waiting to be found. Months had passed since that fateful night on the highway, but Maya's life was slowly beginning to resemble something close to normal again. Her family had welcomed her home with open arms, their joy tempered only by the knowledge of what she had endured. At first, returning to everyday routines felt strange, almost surreal. Walking down the familiar streets near her school or sitting at the dinner table with her mom brought waves of conflicting emotions, gratitude for being safe, but also lingering fear that it could all be taken away again. Her mother, determined to help her heal, became her strongest ally. She attended therapy sessions alongside Maya, learning how to support her daughter through sleepless nights and moments of anxiety. Together, they created a safe space in Maya's room, a cozy corner filled with soft blankets, scented candles, and photos of happy memories. It was a place where Maya could retreat when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her sense of security, one small step at a time. Art remained a powerful outlet for Maya. The mural she had painted with other survivors became a symbol of resilience in her community, drawing visitors who left messages of encouragement on sticky notes around its edges. Inspired by the response, Maya started working on individual pieces to auction off, donating the proceeds to organizations that supported trafficking survivors. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, transforming pain into purpose. Officer Marcus Hayes continued to play an important role in Maya's recovery. He visited regularly, bringing updates about the ongoing investigation and sharing stories of how her bravery had inspired changes within the police department. His initiative to train officers in recognizing signs of distress during routine stops gained national attention, earning him awards and accolades. But for Marcus, the real reward was seeing Maya smile. Not because of any recognition he received, but because she represented hope in action. The trial against James Carter and his co-conspirators stretched over several months, each day bringing new revelations about the depths of their crimes. Survivors, including Maya, testified via video link to avoid facing their abductors directly. Though recounting her experience was difficult, Maya found strength in knowing her words mattered. When the verdicts were finally announced, justice prevailed. Carter and others involved were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, while Victor Langston faced additional charges for his role as a ringleader. For many victims, this closure was bittersweet. It couldn't erase the trauma, but it offered a measure of peace. In the aftermath of the case, Maya became an advocate for change. She spoke at schools and community events, urging people to stay vigilant and report anything suspicious. "You never know who might need your help," she told audiences, her voice steady despite the memories still etched in her mind. Her story resonated deeply, inspiring parents, teachers, and students alike to take action in protecting vulnerable children. Her courage also sparked broader societal shifts. Lawmakers passed stricter laws targeting human trafficking, increasing penalties for offenders and allocating more resources for victim support programs. Nonprofits dedicated to raising awareness saw a surge in donations and volunteers, fueled by public demand for accountability and prevention. Even social media played a role, amplifying campaigns designed to educate the public about warning signs and available resources. As time went on, Maya began to dream again, not just of surviving, but of thriving. She returned to school, throwing herself into her studies and extracurricular activities. Her art teacher encouraged her to apply for a scholarship program for young creatives, and though she initially doubted herself, Maya decided to try. To her astonishment, she was accepted, earning recognition not just for her talent but for her perseverance. One evening, as she stood on stage accepting an award for her contributions to raising awareness, Maya looked out at the crowd. Among the faces were Officer Marcus, her mother, friends, and even some of the survivors she'd met along the way. They clapped and cheered, their smiles lighting up the room. In that moment, Maya realized something profound. Her journey wasn't just hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had supported her, believed in her, and fought alongside her. Life would always carry reminders of the past, but Maya had learned to embrace them, not as scars, but as proof of her strength. She no longer feared the dark corners of her memory. Instead, she used them to fuel her mission of creating a brighter future, for herself and for others still waiting to break free. Robert and Eleanor had been the talk of their small suburban town for as long as anyone could remember. Neighbors often saw them walking hand in hand down the tree-lined streets, their pace slow but steady, like two people who had all the time in the world. They were inseparable, partners not just in marriage but in every aspect of life. From tending to their garden to sharing cups of tea on lazy afternoons, they seemed to have perfected the art of companionship. Their story began decades ago when Robert, a young engineer with a shy smile, met Eleanor at a community dance. She was radiant that evening, her laughter ringing out above the music as she twirled around the floor. Robert couldn't take his eyes off her. It wasn't long before he mustered up the courage to ask her to dance. That single moment sparked something extraordinary, a romance that would span more than half a century. Over the years, they built a life together. They bought a modest house near a park where they would later watch their children play. The walls of their home were filled with photographs, black and white snapshots from their wedding day, colorful images of family vacations, and candid shots of grandchildren laughing on birthdays. Each picture told a chapter of their shared history, a testament to the love that had grown stronger with time. But even in such a seemingly perfect relationship, there were whispers of mystery. Eleanor rarely spoke about her life before meeting Robert. Whenever someone asked about her childhood or early adulthood, she would simply say, "That was another lifetime," and steer the conversation toward happier topics. Robert never pushed her for details. He assumed it was because those years held no significance compared to the life they had created together. Still, deep down, he sometimes wondered if there was more to her past than she let on. As the years passed, Robert and Eleanor grew older together. Their hair turned silver and their steps slowed, but their bond remained unshaken. Friends admired how they still finished each other's sentences and laughed at jokes only they understood. Even their arguments, if you could call them that, were mild and short-lived, ending always with apologies and hugs. To outsiders, they appeared to be living proof that true love exists. Yet beneath this idyllic surface, tiny cracks began to show. Robert noticed that Eleanor sometimes stared out the window with a faraway look in her eyes, as though lost in thought. On occasion, he'd catch her holding an old locket close to her chest, her fingers tracing its edges gently. When he asked about it once, she quickly tucked it away and changed the subject. These moments puzzled him, but he dismissed them, telling himself it was probably nothing. Little did Robert know, these fleeting glimpses into Eleanor's private world hinted at a secret, one that had lain dormant for over 50 years. As fate would soon reveal, the truth was far more complex than either of them could have imagined. For now, though, life carried on as usual. The couple continued their daily routines, cherishing the simple joys of being together while unknowingly standing on the brink of a revelation that would change everything. Life, as Robert and Eleanor knew it, took an unexpected turn one chilly autumn morning. It started with a routine visit to the doctor, a checkup Robert had been putting off for months. At 82 years old, he wasn't as spry as he used to be, but he had always prided himself on his health. He walked every day, ate moderately, and rarely complained about aches or pains. So when the doctor's expression turned somber during the examination, Robert felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The diagnosis came swiftly and mercilessly: terminal illness. There was no cure, no treatment that could reverse what was happening inside his body. The doctor spoke gently, explaining that Robert likely had only a few weeks left. Eleanor sat beside him, gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she nodded quietly, absorbing the weight of the news like someone bracing themselves against a storm. In the days that followed, their home felt different. The air seemed heavier, quieter. Robert tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, insisting that they continue their evening walks and morning coffee rituals. But even he couldn't ignore the shadow looming over them. For the first time in decades, he found himself reflecting deeply on his life, the joys, the regrets, and the unanswered questions. One question, in particular, lingered in his mind. Did he truly know everything about the woman he had spent 55 years loving? Eleanor became his constant companion, caring for him with unwavering devotion. She cooked his favorite meals, adjusted his pillows when he struggled to get comfortable, and read aloud from books when fatigue made it hard for him to focus. Yet, there were moments when Robert caught her staring into space, her face etched with sadness. Once, while helping her fold laundry, he noticed her hands trembling slightly. When he asked if she was all right, she forced a smile and said, "I'm fine, just tired." But Robert wasn't convinced. As his strength waned, his curiosity grew. He began noticing things he had overlooked before, like the way Eleanor hesitated whenever he mentioned their early years together, or how she sometimes lingered by the attic door, as though debating whether to go inside. These observations gnawed at him, not because he doubted her love, but because he wanted to understand her fully before his time ran out. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch watching the leaves fall, Robert broached the subject carefully. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft but steady, "is there anything you've never told me? Anything from your past?" She froze for a moment, her knitting needles pausing mid-stitch. Then, without looking at him, she replied, "Robert, my past doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is us, what we've built together." Her words sounded rehearsed, almost defensive, and Robert sensed she was hiding something. Still, he let the matter drop. For now. That night, as Eleanor slept beside him, Robert lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with possibilities. What could she be keeping from him, and why? The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that he needed answers. Time was slipping through his fingers, and he couldn't shake the feeling that understanding Eleanor's secrets might bring him peace, or perhaps reveal a side of her he had never known. The next morning, driven by a mix of determination and fear, Robert decided to take matters into his own hands. While Eleanor busied herself preparing breakfast, he grabbed his walker and slowly made his way toward the attic. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he pressed on, knowing that whatever awaited him upstairs might hold the key to unlocking the truth. The attic was a place Robert hadn't visited in years. It was dark, dusty, and filled with forgotten things. Old furniture draped in sheets, boxes of holiday decorations, and stacks of photo albums that hadn't been opened in decades. The air smelled musty, and the wooden floor creaked under his weight as he shuffled forward with the help of his walker. He felt like an explorer stepping into uncharted territory, each step bringing him closer to uncovering something hidden. Robert's heart pounded as he scanned the cluttered space. His eyes landed on an old wooden trunk shoved into the far corner, almost concealed by a tattered quilt. Something about it drew him in, a quiet pull, as if the trunk itself held secrets waiting to be discovered. With some effort, he maneuvered his walker close enough to kneel down awkwardly, his knees protesting against the strain. Using both hands, he brushed away layers of dust from the lid, revealing faded carvings etched into the wood. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the latch and opened the trunk. Inside, he found a jumble of items, yellowed letters tied together with string, brittle newspaper clippings, and a stack of photographs bundled neatly in one corner. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, relics of another time. But when Robert picked up one of the photos, his breath caught in his throat. It was Eleanor, younger, radiant, and smiling, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man Robert didn't recognize. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had an easy grin and an arm draped casually around Eleanor's shoulders. They looked happy, carefree, like two people deeply in love. Robert studied the picture intently, his mind racing. Who was this man? And why had Eleanor never mentioned him? As he sifted through the contents of the trunk, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. There were more photographs, all featuring the same mysterious man. In some, they stood together at what appeared to be a beach. In others, they posed in front of a small cottage surrounded by wildflowers. Each image told a story Robert had no part of, a chapter of Eleanor's life she had kept entirely to herself. Among the photographs, Robert found a small velvet box tucked beneath a stack of papers. Opening it carefully, he discovered a delicate gold locket inside. The surface was engraved with initials, E.H. and J.M. His stomach churned as he traced the letters with his thumb. E.H. clearly stood for Eleanor, but who was J.M.? Was this the name of the man in the pictures? And why did Eleanor still have this locket after all these years? The discovery left Robert reeling. Questions swirled in his mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Had Eleanor loved someone else before him? If so, why had she never spoken about it? He felt a pang of betrayal, not because he doubted her love for him, but because the secrecy made him question how well he truly knew her. For 55 years, he had believed their marriage was built on trust and openness. Now, staring at the evidence before him, he wondered if that foundation had cracks he'd failed to see. Still clutching the locket, Robert sat back on his heels, his thoughts spiraling. He wanted answers, but he also feared what those answers might reveal. A part of him wished he could put everything back in the trunk, close the lid, and pretend he'd never come upstairs. But another part, the part driven by curiosity and love, knew he couldn't turn away now. Whatever secret Eleanor had been carrying, it was time for her to share it. With a heavy sigh, Robert gathered the photographs, letters, and locket, placing them carefully in his lap. He knew Eleanor would be home soon, and when she returned, they would have to face the truth together, no matter how painful it might be. When Eleanor returned home, the house was unusually quiet. She set her grocery bags on the counter and called out for Robert, but there was no response. Frowning slightly, she made her way through the rooms, checking each one until she reached the base of the stairs leading to the attic. That's when she noticed it, the faint creaking sound coming from above. Her heart skipped a beat. The attic? Why would Robert go up there? Climbing the narrow staircase, she found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by items from the old trunk. His walker rested nearby, and in his hands he held the gold locket she hadn't seen in decades. Her breath hitched as her eyes darted around the attic. Photographs scattered across the floor, letters spilling out of their bundles, and the open trunk gaping like a wound exposing long-buried memories. For a moment, she froze, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. "Robert," she said finally, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. In that instant, Eleanor saw the weight of his illness etched into his face. Not just physical fatigue, but emotional exhaustion too. His blue eyes, once so full of warmth, now bore into hers with a mixture of hurt and determination. "I think I deserve an explanation," he said quietly, holding up the locket. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried a heaviness that made Eleanor feel as though the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her gaze dropped to the photographs strewn across the floor, the images of her and James smiling brightly under the sun, their arms wrapped around each other. Memories flooded back, sharp and vivid, bringing with them a wave of guilt she had spent years trying to bury. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet Robert's steady gaze. These don't mean anything," she stammered, taking a hesitant step closer. "They're from another time, Robert, another life." But Robert wasn't convinced. He pointed to one of the pictures, his hand shaking slightly. "Who is this man, Eleanor? And why do you still have this locket? You never mentioned any of this before." Eleanor sank onto the edge of an old chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, struggling to find the right words. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? Finally, she whispered, "His name was James. We were close. Very close." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. Robert felt as though someone had punched him in the chest, though he tried to hide it. He had always known Eleanor must have had a life before him, but seeing tangible proof of it and hearing her confirm it was more painful than he'd anticipated. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "All these years, Eleanor. Did you think I wouldn't understand?" Tears welled up in her eyes and she shook her head frantically. "It's not that simple, Robert. It happened so long ago and I thought it was over. I thought I'd left it behind. When I met you, everything changed. You gave me a new beginning, a better life. I didn't want to ruin that." Her words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and pleading. But Robert's silence only deepened her anxiety. He stared at the objects in front of him, the photos, the letters, the locket, as if they were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite fit together. After what felt like an eternity, he asked softly, "Is there more to this story?" Eleanor hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She wanted to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the secret she'd carried for so many years, but the words caught in her throat. The truth was complicated, messy, and painful, and Robert, frail and unwell, deserved answers that wouldn't break him further. "Please," she begged, reaching for his hand. "Not today. Give me some time to explain properly. Please, Robert." He studied her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of deception. All he saw was fear and regret. With a heavy sigh, he nodded reluctantly. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "I need to know everything." As Eleanor helped him back downstairs, neither of them spoke. The house felt smaller somehow, suffocating, under the weight of untold truths. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, the unraveling of secrets that had lain dormant for 55 years. The next afternoon, the house was unnaturally quiet. Eleanor sat beside Robert's bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the faint lines on her face, making her look older than she had in years. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. This was the moment she had dreaded for decades, the reckoning she knew would come eventually but had hoped to avoid forever. Robert lay propped up against his pillows, watching her intently. His eyes were soft but probing, as if trying to read between the lines before she even began. He didn't interrupt or rush her. He simply waited, giving her the space to speak. For that, Eleanor was grateful. "His name was James," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "We grew up together in a small town not far from here. From the time we were children, it felt like our lives were intertwined. By the time we were adults, everyone expected us to marry, including ourselves." A faint smile crossed her lips as she remembered those days, but it faded quickly. "He was everything to me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree near their window, filling the silence with its gentle murmur. When she continued, her voice wavered slightly. "We were engaged, you know, planning our future together. But then something happened. Something I never saw coming." Eleanor hesitated again, her fingers twisting nervously around the edge of her sweater. "One day James just disappeared. No note, no warning, nothing. At first I thought maybe he'd changed his mind about us and left without saying goodbye. It broke my heart, but I tried to convince myself that people can change, that love isn't always enough." Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard before continuing. "But weeks turned into months and I heard nothing from him. Everyone assumed he was gone for good. Maybe dead, maybe running from something. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that I felt empty, like half of me had been ripped away." Robert listened silently, his expression unreadable. He wanted to reach out and comfort her, but he sensed this was something she needed to get through on her own. "Then one day," Eleanor continued, "I received a letter. It was from James. He explained that he hadn't left willingly. He'd been taken captive while traveling overseas. They held him prisoner for years, cutting him off from the outside world. He said he tried to escape countless times, but it wasn't until much later that he finally succeeded." Her voice softened, tinged with both sadness and awe. "By the Time he came back, I was already married to you, Robert. I didn't know what to do. Seeing him again after all those years, it stirred up feelings I thought I'd buried. But I also knew I couldn't turn my back on the life we'd built together. You had given me a second chance at happiness when I thought I'd lost everything. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, unchecked and unashamed. So I made a choice, a selfish, painful choice. I burned his letter and told him I couldn't see him anymore. I stayed with you because I loved you, Robert. I still do. But leaving James behind, it haunted me every single day. The room fell silent except for the sound of Eleanor's quiet sobs. Robert reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. He didn't say anything, not yet. Instead, he let the weight of her words settle over them, knowing that some truths take time to fully absorb. The room was heavy with silence after Eleanor finished speaking. Her confession hung in the air like a storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. Robert sat motionless, his mind racing as he tried to process everything she had revealed. The woman he had loved for 55 years, the woman who had been his rock, his partner, his everything, had carried this burden alone all these decades. It wasn't just her past with James that shocked him. It was the sheer weight of her sacrifice and the guilt she had silently shouldered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on her lap, too afraid to look at him. She braced herself for anger, disappointment, or even rejection, but instead she felt the warmth of his hand still holding hers tightly. Slowly she glanced up at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Robert asked finally, his voice soft but laced with emotion. "All these years, Eleanor. Why didn't you trust me enough to share this?" Eleanor shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't about trust, Robert," she said earnestly. "I wanted to protect you, from the pain, from the confusion, from the messiness of it all. When I met you, I truly believed I could leave my past behind. You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost everything. How could I risk ruining what we had by dragging old wounds into our new life?" Robert exhaled deeply, running a shaky hand over his face. He understood her reasoning, but it didn't make the revelation any easier to digest. But keeping it inside? Didn't that hurt you more? Didn't it feel like you were living two lives, one with me and one trapped in your memories? She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping under the weight of his question. "Yes," she admitted. "Every day I wrestled with it. There were nights when I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made the right choice. Loving you saved me, Robert, it really did. But letting go of James, it left a scar I couldn't heal." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time, Robert realized how much strength it must have taken for Eleanor to build a life with him, while burying such a monumental part of herself. He thought back to all the little moments, the times she seemed distant, the way she clutched the locket without realizing it, the faraway look in her eyes during quiet evenings. Now those fragments of behavior made sense. They weren't signs of disloyalty or regret. They were echoes of a love she had sacrificed for him. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered, breaking the silence. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to give us the best chance at happiness. And I did love you, completely and wholeheartedly. I still do." Robert reached out and cupped her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "I know," he said softly. "And I love you too, Eleanor, always have, always will. But secrets, they change things, even good ones." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. "I know I should have told you earlier," she said. "But I was scared of losing you, scared of facing the parts of myself I didn't want to see. I thought burying it would make it disappear, but it only grew heavier with time." As they sat together, surrounded by the quiet hum of the house, Robert felt a strange sense of clarity washing over him. Yes, Eleanor's secret had shaken him, but it hadn't diminished the love they shared. If anything, it added depth to their story, a testament to the complexities of human relationships and the sacrifices people make for the ones they care about most. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," Robert said firmly, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Whatever happened with James, it's part of who you are. And I want to know all of you, Eleanor. Not just the pieces you show me." Her lips trembled as she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered, "for forgiving me, for listening, for loving me even after all this." They sat there for a while longer, holding on to each other as the afternoon light faded into dusk. Though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, they both knew they had taken the first step toward healing, together.